Okay, so once we've got our basic elements of the lifting the veil posture, then we have to go through our usual practice routine. That's going to include standing, visualization, slow movement, and just checking the posture, bringing it up to the lock point, checking that the transmission of force is correct, and trying it in different variations, lead hand and backhand. And that also is important because trying it in different variations helps you to feel the differences a lot more distinctly. And in this case, it also helps to underline the difference between using rise and open and rise and close. And then from there, our next stage of practice is to bring in more explosivity. And first of all, we want to use explosivity up to the lock point and hold it there. And this, of course, does help us to check the posture a little bit. We can feel that we're holding the structure, that we've stacked the structure correctly. But the most important thing is that usually we don't use postures like this in isolation. We're going to need to transition from this posture into another posture. And in each one, we don't usually just hit, pull back to the guard position and then do another punch. We want to transition, or best of all, to merge postures together, and we're going to look at some of that in a moment. But we follow the correct training path, which begins with initially just lifting it up to the lock point, holding it there, and feeling the moment of relaxation where we would move into the next posture. And then once we're comfortable that we've got the posture correct up to the lock point and that we've got all of the body mechanics, broadly speaking, moving in the right direction, in all directions, of course, in each one, then we can bring it up into a more explosive movement. And things always change when you start doing things with more power and more speed, so it takes everything up to another level. And I'll come back to this idea again and again, that if you're finding it easy to do something, then the training practice that you're doing isn't sufficient enough. It's not challenging enough to push you to the next level. So as soon as you feel like you've 95% got there, well, that 5% extra improvement will be almost impossible to get by continuing to do the same thing. You've got to push it up into the next level. And it's doing the next level of training that will compensate for that 5%, will get you past that 5% and beyond. So moving it up into faster movement is how we do this in this case. But throughout this series, I want to do what we call in each one escalating the basics. So we don't just go step by step, we keep building faster and faster. So when we reach the 95% point, doing it at full speed, then we've got to bring it into some kind of resistance. And it can be a partner, but you need to do tons and tons of grunt work, and you don't need a partner for that. So something like a Pilates ball is fine, or in this case, I've got the perfect tree branch. It has the exact consistency that just feeds back whatever energy you put into it. I mean, real kinetic energy. And one of the things you learn doing this is how little energy it actually takes to unbalance you, to just knock you off your route. So if we look at this example here, you can just about see that I ping myself off my own route. I just about control it, but you can see it lifts my heels off the floor because it just unbalances me. And that's not a lot of energy that I'm using, and also it's not all of the energy I'm using because some of it's dissipated in the tree branch. So when you work with some resistance like this, you can think about it like Wang Shangjai thinks about it, even though it isn't really like this in terms of actual physics, but you can think about it as energy rebounding into your body and flooding your body, and it will go to wherever the weakness is because it's looking to escape and you're looking to control it. That's what we mean by structure. It's looking to escape somewhere, so it's looking for weak points, and those weak points can pull you right off your balance. Or worse. Bit of Yiquan vibration skill for you there. Next, we can experiment with the posture, lengthening it, so we don't always have to do it like this. We can do it so it kind of merges with a more of a cross-like movement or a jab-like movement. The only thing to remember is that the lock point is going primarily up rather than forwards, and this is what Wang Shangjai means when he says that, okay, you develop whole body unified force, 6-directional force, but you have to skew it in a direction to transmit the force to a particular contact point. It's absolutely not the case that you want to transmit the same amount of force or hit with the same amount of power in all directions at the same time, and Wang Shangjai makes that explicitly clear. It's just an ideology that's kind of caught on that, well, why people think that isn't the issue. what really matters is the common sense thing that Wang Shangjai is talking about, which is you want to hit somebody really hard, so you have to maximize power. And one of the ways that we do that is skewing postures, skewing the 6-directional force so that it maximizes the power transmission at one particular point, the hit point. And we can do postures balanced if we want, but remember, balanced postures are not as good as unbalanced postures for martial arts, and this is another example of this. The unbalanced posture, the skewed posture, transmits the force to a particular point, even if there's force being generated omnidirectionally, which there is. But, as Wang Shangjai himself says, you need to skew it to a particular point to maximise force transmission. Okay, let's move on to a different variation and imagine that we lift the veil, i.e. we hit under the opponent's guard and then we want to punch in. It's in the nature of this posture that we've used a lot of articulated force, what we call kinking, and that's when we, in this case, lift the wrist up to get that extra bit of farley. It's the kind of thing you'll see all the time in push hands. This means that the crookedness of the arm is much more pronounced than in a jab, and the screwing force has screwed the wrist right over, so if we were to hit in like that, it absolutely would be dangerous for the wrist. And as I explained in the beginner series, I think this causes a lot of confusion because I always use that twisted screwing force wrist that's characteristic of each one, some schools of each one, and it causes a lot of confusion because it absolutely does look unsafe. And I've said before, I remember my coach saying, I know it looks wrong, but the reason why it works is because the hit is with the 3 bottom knuckles, and the screwing posture actually puts them in line with the ulna, doesn't take them out of line, it puts them more in line with the ulna. And when you get that, you have to build up to it slowly, but when you get that, it's a much stronger posture than hitting in with the first 2 knuckles. But when we use the lifting the veil posture, we concave the wrist so much that it actually takes it far beyond what would be safe. It takes it far out of line with the ulna, so we don't want to punch straight in with a jab from there. What we do instead is we recognise the structural sympathy with a posture that in each one is called a mountain chopping punch. It's what we call like an inverted overhand, so the thumb is pointing, broadly speaking, down, and you punch in with a kind of upside down jab or cross, and that puts the 3 knuckles back in line with the ulna. Done fast, it looks like a jab in this case, but it's not. I'm actually turning my hand over a lot more. Anyway, we're using hit and stop, so lift the veil, hit and stop, and then flow immediately without any pullback into the partially inverted jab strike. And you can see the clarity of structure, and it's cool and it's not easy to do, but in each one we always want to merge things more and more. So we try and get it faster and faster, and we try and get that lock point hidden in the movement. And I know a lot of people say this as a kind of bullshit excuse for not being able to do whatever it is they're talking about, but you actually do have to feel this. You can't see it. Once it reaches that point where the hitting up lock point is hidden in the flow of the movement, you can't see it. It's too fast, but you can feel it, and you can feel it when it's done to you because you can feel the energy push your arm up and then the energy change to punching in. So if you look carefully, you can still see there's a timing there of 1, 2, 1 for the push up and 2 for the punch out. And it also depends on the kind of posture you're doing, how smooth you can get that transition, because if you're doing a posture, for example, this posture, where I'm going in 2 completely different directions, so I'm going up and forward and then I'm going out to the side, then it's a lot harder to get exactly the kind of seamless, invisible. If you want to get force in the initial posture, it's very difficult to get a seamless posture, so it kind of becomes a little bit more 1, 2 again. But this is how you do it again, practicing with resistance, getting it smaller and smaller. You can definitely get it smaller than I'm doing there anyway. It's just that the tree branch itself won't give away enough in a way that an arm will, where you can get it a bit smaller, get the movement a little bit more smoother and combined. Well, things are a lot easier if you practice on the air anyway, and obviously that's why we see so many demonstrations that are only ever done on the air. Everything changes with resistance. That's why you've got to practice with some kind of resistance. You've got to practice on the air, get the posture right, but then you've got to practice with resistance and then eventually bring it into live drills and live training. There's no cutaway because we haven't got the time, but I've got plenty of footage doing stuff like that. I'll show it again another time. So here's with the rear hand, getting the similar thing, trying to combine the 2 lock points. 1, 2, and then just try to get it faster and faster, and then smoother and smoother, try to combine it into one movement. And then some different variations, hitting up with the lead hand and then hitting in with the rear hand. And I wanted to bring in this kind of forearm strike that we've looked at previously, because this is a good example of a few things that we can just recap. So one is the multiplier effect. So if we know one thing and we know another thing, we can start putting it together to create a third thing. So we're creating a little bit of a combination here. Lift the veil into Buddha's judgment, into treats for dog. But it's also a good time to remind everyone of complementary routing, a key concept in the structural movement paradigm. And we're going to need this as we move into looking at different aspects of the natural set. Remember from the beginner series that complementary routing is the way that one posture has a strong sympathy for moving into another posture. So, for example, see the way that the pivot root on one leg pushes you back a little bit, and then that's very complementary to adding a bit of extra volume into moving forwards with the pivot root from the other leg. But it also ensures a deep economy of movement. Nothing is lost in the transition from one posture to another, rather something is gained. Lots of things are gained. We can gain speed, we can gain volume, we can gain succinctness. So there's no clumsy transitions, and we begin to feel like this, because it's not like every single posture has a structural sympathy with the next posture. There are certain postures that do and certain postures that don't. We want to start feeling those naturally, because that's going to determine how we get these postures compounded into neat, succinct combinations. And then from there, again, we use all of our training tools to try and create a more succinct, compounded and integrated movement. Lock points by definition are big clunky things, and they're moments of whole body stiffness that we don't want to exaggerate if we possibly can. In fact, we want to go the other way. We want to somehow integrate them within the smoothness of the movement to combine circular and square force. And it's all part of our process of cultivation, trying to think about, well, where can we put this movement? Can we put it into the shoulders, put it into the body, put it into the rotation? Just trying to get everything compounded together into a smoother overall structure. And when we start getting it right, the two movements compound into one movement. It starts looking like a single posture of multiple parts. And in this case, you can see how much work I'm doing to create this kind of rotation with the shoulders, to rotate them into the same movement, to create them as two aspects of the same rotational posture. And that doesn't just make the movement more compounded, there's always economies of scale. So as you start getting bigger, more integrated movement, it adds more power, more speed, more volume. Everything starts adding up to a more successful outcome.